there was language in the Constitution that made it difficult for us to either not meet for a year or to meet over Zoom. So we wanted to make it clear that, for example, in a pandemic, when we're not permitted to meet, we actually could do that without potentially running afoul of our own Constitution. So I'm going to start working my way through here. Please call out if you would like me to stop and if you have any questions about something. So initially, this is really just kind of cleaning up some of the territory information. And then we move into section 7. Most of this is mechanical, except here, for example. Previously, we had to hold the Synod Assembly annually. We ran into a problem. That was the problem we ran into in 2020 when we weren't able to meet. So we've included language in the amendments saying that the Synod Council can affirmatively vote not to hold the meeting if necessary, because if it becomes a necessary thing. A lot of these other things are conforming changes to that. This allows us to give notices about some of these things by email instead of having to do paper mail all the time. Wanted to recognize that we have ministers of word and service as well as ministers of word and sacrament. Okay, section 8. Yeah, this is these were basically bringing things up to current practice, I believe, was the general thrust of these changes. Some of this was conforming the language to make it non-gender specific language. Okay. And moving into section 9. This is really conforming to our current practice. Okay. This change, you can see that we struck a lot of language here. When we did the analysis, there's another section that also talks about bishops' elections. And what we found was that this language here restated the other language. So for clarity, we just consolidated, referred back to the other section. And some things on the Synod Council. Again, this conforms to, this is interesting. This is a required provision of the Constitution. There are certain provisions, and you can recognize them by the cross sign here, that where the church-wide model constitution says that your constitution must have this provision as written. And so these are changes to conform to the required changes in the model constitution. And again, you can recognize those with a little cross sign next to them. Let's see. This change is, as you can see, this is basically this language we added when we consolidated some of the Synod Council seats and the way that the various sections of the Synod fed into the council members. And it was effective at the time that we adopted that change. So we're past that time now. So we just basically removed the language because we no longer need it. This was just a one-shot trigger that happened at that time. It basically said, okay, we're making this change. Here's how we do the change. And now that we've done the change, we don't need that in the Constitution anymore. Okay. I think this was all redundant, which is why it was removed. This is a bylaw here, and this is a continuing resolution. So one of the things to note in here is you can recognize the bylaws. They have 3 numbers, and the continuing resolutions have 2 numbers and then a letter and some stuff. As we changed the language of the Constitution, it became necessary to change the bylaws to conform to the new language. So there are some changes in here that you will see to bylaws and continuing resolutions that we will make at the same time that we vote. But at the same time we vote on the constitutional changes, we'll vote on those as well, just to make sure that they conform. This is something that lets us do a Zoom, lets the Synod Council meet over Zoom, and just makes it clear under California law that we can do that. And okay, this is, I think, more cleanup here. And that is it for the constitutional changes. Now, are there any questions or sections you would like me to go back to or dive into in more detail? Okay. There is one thing I wanted to mention on these. Our parliamentarian is looking into the question of whether we can debate and amend these changes at the assembly. That's still an open question. It's not clear under the current bylaws. So under the current constitutional provision, whether we are able to do that. So it will either be something where we can debate it, or it's going to be an up or down vote on the full set of changes. We're not sure yet. As I said, our parliamentarian is checking with Churchwide and looking at our documents and gathering information. So we will have to let you know at the assembly what that's exactly going to look like. All right. Is there anything else that you would like to cover in this meeting? Okay. In that case, first of all, thank you all very much for joining the meeting and taking an interest in these governing documents. I know that it warms my heart, and I know it warms Pastor Laura's heart as well, that people are going to come by and join us for these things.
Jeff, there is a question
Yes,
from Pastor Julie in the chat.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Okay. Zoom is being very helpful.
Rachel, can we pull down the share?
Sorry, I can do that.
Oh, thanks, Jeff.
There it is.
Oh, there they all are. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. So Pastor Julie asks, what constitutes an annual meeting of a conference? And that's one of the things that we needed to clear up because our practice has been to have the annual meeting at the assembly. And let me get the language that we've gone to here, because at an assembly, you can do that. At a Zoom meeting, it's a little bit trickier, but there, the general thrust of the changes was that you can also use the regional gatherings to do that. But I think if we actually want to have an annual meeting in a year that we are doing Zoom, I'm not sure that I think your other option is to actually physically have that meeting, but that's hard to do. So, for example, if you have a pandemic and you're forced to meet electronically, then you would have to do that annual meeting electronically. But let me find the actual language in here.
Julie, I'm seeing the chat that the conference meets every month. Yeah, ours does as well, but I think the intention of these conference gatherings is to include more than clergy and have as many lay people there as possible. And Jeff, while you're looking, I'm just going to talk, and I may actually misremember. So if I do, I will count on either you or Rachel to restore my memory. But I believe there was a time in which the Constitution stated that those conference gatherings would happen at an assembly. And my memory is that was simply to make certain that it happened while people were naturally gathered. And I believe what we've done now is allowed some more flexibility, that those conference gatherings could happen in a number of ways, to allow for the possibility of a pandemic when we couldn't gather in certain ways, and to give us a little more flexibility. As you mentioned, the regional gathering would be one of those flexible moments when we chose to have conference gatherings in this particular way, this particular year. So it gives us a little more flexibility as a synod on how we choose to meet in conference, so long as we do so on an annual basis.
Yes, I agree. That is what we did. Please go ahead.
I would just add that, I mean, we've regularly met annually as a conference, Hukilau conference, and I think the advantage of the added advantage is you can allow more, not just voting members to the assembly participate.
Yeah, you're right, Phyllis. Aloha. I happened to be in Wahiawa this morning.
Aloha. Oh, good.
You're right. I mean, Hukilau has done maybe the best job of all of the conferences of the Pacifica Synod in finding ways to meet regularly. I think the other conferences are not as good at doing that in the way that Hukilau does. And so some of this language is to provide opportunity for those things to happen. Yeah.
Right. This is the change that I think we were thinking about here. So it said that basically there needs to be a general meeting at some point, at least annually, for the conference. Conference does not necessarily have to conduct that meeting. And this is essentially allows a little bit more flexibility in how those meetings happen, really conforming the Constitution in this case to our current general practice. And let me see.
So question. What I read there then says that the only way, unless we did a Zoom from the assembly, that would be open to all members of all congregations with in the conference, it has to be locally held. Is that misreading it?
Well, a meeting in this case could be a Zoom meeting, right?
Yes, it could be. That's why if it's from the assembly, if the only one they're doing is from the assembly, then that would have to be. But I don't know that would.
In this case, it could also be something like one of the regional gatherings.
Yeah. Right.
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 So it could be something like that. Basically, it's just a more open meeting where
encouraging people to gather. Yeah.
Right.
I was part of that discussion. I remember it was part of the discussion was about the fact that when we do the conference meetings at the Synod Assembly, it's only open to Synod Assembly representatives. It's not actually open to everybody in the conference. So I think part of the goal of doing that at the regional gathering was to be more inclusive. But someone in the chat did make a kind of interesting point. The regional gatherings were great, but we didn't actually technically get together as a conference. There was actually, at least in ours, very little discussion about the conference or the conference deans or anything like that. So that might just be a note for the future to try and incorporate that a little bit more. But I do think the goal of including more people in the conference, in the conversation, was a big piece of moving it from the assembly itself.
Any more questions on this point? Okay, then I do see that we have a question from the bishop. Will the chair know about the ruling about debating these things prior to the assembly? We certainly hope so. But we may have to ask the parliamentarian as we get a little bit closer. And let's see. Okay. Other questions? All right.
Well, sorry, I do just want to highlight what Pastor Julie did put in the chat. Just to bring clarity around if a conference needs to elect a dean, and I don't think at our regional gathering that needed to take place, but what is the mechanism for that happening under this kind of general approach?
So typically this has happened at the regional gatherings that we've allowed time for at a more traditional Synod Assembly. This year, so Julie, I'm not sure, I mean, you're Saddleback, yeah? The only dean that I showed that needed to be reelected was in the Rejoice Conference, and we talked to them separately. So if we needed more deans to be elected this year, we would have done it differently. So so this is just a very strange year, and the fact that we didn't have conference gatherings this year is an unusual thing, and because we did things funky this year. So in future years, when we do have those deans that need to be elected, we will have that specific time during assembly at least. And that's at the very least so that the conferences can get together, even if it is just the ones who are there for assembly. But there's also nothing stopping the deans from calling a meeting for their conference. So that's that.
My concern is the word annually, because it's not always an annual thing.
So I have never seen a conference do an official annual meeting. I think this is one of those things in the Constitution where, yeah, it says shall, but our practice has been, I have never seen a conference do an official annual meeting. So I don't know what to say about that, but it's kind of like a similar thing as previously in the Constitution. It says that we shall have a mutual ministry committee for the bishop, and that hasn't been in place for 12 years at least anyway. So that was cleaned up. So maybe this could have been cleaned up to say the conferences, maybe we could have cleaned it up and not say shall. We do need a meeting where the dean is elected. It just, this year was only one dean needed to be elected. So it's a weird year. We've been saying that since 2020.
Yeah, and I think this particular change here makes it so that it is an annual meeting somewhere, but not necessarily the conference's own dedicated annual meeting for that election. So, for example, it could be at a regional gathering, or it could be at a Synod Assembly, which I think allows it to, it basically conforms the language to our previous practice of doing these things at assemblies, but potentially at a different annual meeting also. Yes.
I'm a pastor. I've only been a pastor this is my 4th year, but we've never had an annual conference meeting. We have a conference meeting every month.
Mm-hmm.
So my concern is that this language may stop us from electing a new dean.
How come?
Because we don't have annual meetings. We have to wait until next year.
Well, that's when your dean needs to be elected.
There are other factors involved.
Okay.
So at your monthly meetings, is that clergy or is it a combination?
Anyone can attend. It is traditionally clergy and a couple of guests.
I would suggest that if there needs to be a dean election, that a meeting will be called by the existing dean and would invite both clergy and non-rostered people. and have it be specifically outlined that it would be for the election of a dean. If that happens, then I think you would be completely in line with the Constitution. Jeff, do you agree with that?
I think so too. That's definitely the intent, right? It's the idea is you want to have enough people there to make it a legitimate election.
Which
And
is,
so
I think, why the default has been at a Synod Assembly, because
Mhm.
that is an opportunity when you do have enough lay and rostered leaders from a conference to be able to have a legitimate vote, just as you're saying, Jeff.
Right.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
If you have a meeting to elect a dean, does everyone get to vote that's attending? Who gets to vote for the dean?
I think any member of a congregation in the conference.
Okay, that attends the meeting.
Correct. But if
Okay.
someone came from another conference, they would not get to vote.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions on this point or on other items? Okay. It sounds like we have no additional questions, but I want to give people enough chance to you know, if one pops up or if you think of one, I just want to make sure that you have a chance to do it. So I don't want to end us too early, but at the same time, I'd like to be respectful of people's time. So we'll give it a couple more minutes, and then if there are no questions at that point, we'll give you some time back.
It was mentioned that the Rejoice conference has to elect a dean, and forgive me, I'm very new to all this. Is that happening at the assembly, like next week, or when is that happening?
I think that election is 2025.
Oh,
So that
okay.
would be
So
next
not this year. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like we have no more questions. Again, we'll let you know as we get to the assembly whether these items, whether our rules permit debate on these items or not. We again, we don't know yet. Our parliamentarian is checking into that, and we will let you know. Thank you all very much for coming by and being with us during this time. Again, my name is Jeff Cours. I am the resolutions chair. You can reach me if you have additional questions. I'll do what I can to answer them. And I think the easiest way to do that, Rachel, should I put my email here, or would it be easier for them to go through the Synod? What do you think?
Either way, you could throw it in the chat there, and then we could
Okay.
send it out to everybody afterwards.
All right. Okay, there's my email if you have additional questions, and I will do what I can to find out the answer for you. Again, thank you all very much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you all at the assembly. Excellent.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We'll see you.
See you later.
When